going to give you a quick update on what features we've got coming out in this release, and then I'm actually going to jump in and demo that. So yes, today I am playing the part of Sam. Many of you who know Sam very well. Unfortunately, Sam left us in December, so I am working on getting a replacement for Sam. But yeah, she is definitely going to be missed. I know a lot of you did interact with her, so I'm going to try to do a Sam level quality job here. I might even throw a few Samisms into the mix. So starting off just a high level, we've got a release this quarter that's very much focused around Linux. We do also have a few enhancements that are coming in on the, after we released Mac OS support. We've got a few things that we added there. So we're going to talk about that. Mac OS Sonoma support and the ability to always reboot or force the reboot for the Mac OS update maintenance window as well. So I'm going to show you a couple of things there. And from the Windows patch side, another very highly requested an addition here to exclude patches via patch group. We'll talk about that one a little bit more as well. So a couple of very good things that we got coming here, and I know Sam worked with a number of you on a lot of this. So first off, Linux support. We refer to this internally as patch to zero, and really all that means is we're going from a content-based approach to a contentless approach. The Linux world is very different than Windows or Mac. Now, obviously, I know Mac is built off of a Linux distro, but it is very much controlled by Apple, and they have a very content-based approach into how they're doing things there as well. The Linux world, it's kind of the Wild West. It's open source. They can, you can have different vendors releasing a variation of an RPM specific to their organization. So I know some of you are in the healthcare space. A great example of how that affects the Linux side. If you're running Epic, the way that you're doing updates there, you could have the regular Red Hat repository, or you could have, in the case of a system that's running the Epic system, you could have the Epic variation of those same RPMs. Completely different set of content, minor variations to it, and it makes it so that content-based approach is very difficult. Why am I going to all this detail? Well, it means that as we go into this, the experience is a little bit different when we get into Linux than what it'll be with Windows and Mac. So with this release, we are adding in the ability to update your policies with a Linux configuration. You're going to be able to deploy Linux agents to a number of flavors and versions. And we'll talk a little bit about the version coverage here, because we're rapidly trying to test and release them all. But the ones that don't make the final testing before our release date later this month will just be coming out incrementally after that. So the interactions and things like patch intelligence. Again, patch intelligence is based on our catalog of content. With Windows and with Mac, that content is automatically there. What I'm going to show you today is an environment that's already assessing Linux systems. So there will be Linux content in patch intelligence with what I'm going to show you today. But when you do it for the first time, you won't see Linux content there until you deploy your first agents and scan what is basically available on those Linux systems because of what's in your Yum repository. So we'll talk about some of those nuances a little bit here. But the biggest thing is I wanted to make sure people understand some of those differences, so you're not concerned about or confused by that as you start to play around with this yourselves. So we're going to cover that. The exclude by patch group. So there's really two kind of default ways to configure your Neurons patch policy. There is the approach of doing a very dynamic approach. You could have basically configure it to scan and deploy everything. And you can also go with a very strict approach. For those of you who have very strict change control requirements, you can explicitly say, these are the only things that are allowed to be deployed in my environment. Now, which approach is right for you depends on your processes and how your organization would like to work. So that first option, the dynamic approach, if you ran into a situation where an update broke something in your environment, the limitation we had before was we could only do patch groups by that explicit allow. We didn't have a exclude by patch group in that configuration. So what we've added now is the ability to do that. So you can have that dynamic policy and you can do exclusions of very specific things, but keep doing the dynamic approach across the rest of your policy. So a nice enhancement there. Again, kind of brings us down to a little bit more parity with the on-prem way that a lot of you were doing things either in EPM or security controls. So I know a number of you were looking for that. Apparently, my background is getting a lot of conversation there. Yes, it is the Dr. Strange. I believe the New York Sanctum. That's the image there. So copyright infringement. We're going to get in trouble for this. I apologize, Cassidy. The next one here. Go ahead, Mike.
Real quick, we do have a quick question from Scott Ellenberger. Chris, he's asking if the repositories that Linux distro would connect to can be configured for a local or on-prem repo that may be different or have more or less packages than I think presumably the regular Linux distro.
Yeah, good question. So let me touch on that real quick. To our solution, because of this contentless approach, we don't care what's in the repository. If it's in there, we're interacting with the Linux system and we're saying, hey, what are you what are you missing for RPM? So what you connect up to your repository is really what matters. Whatever content you add in there, whether it's the standard stuff directly from Oracle for Oracle, Red Hat, or whatever, or if it's from another vendor releasing a different custom variation of that, the Red Hat RPMs, if it's a third-party application installed on that Linux distro, you just need to hook up that additional content to your repository. Our product should be able to see it and let you interact with and push the updates for that. Really, it's not us pushing it at that point. We're interacting with the Linux system and telling it what to do, and it's going to talk to its repository to get everything it needs. So if you are running some additional content that's not standard for like out-of-the-box Oracle, that's okay. Hook it up there. As long as you've hooked that content up to your repo, it should show up for us. If you're running in an air-gapped environment, that's a case where you're still going to have to make sure you get the content down to your repo and make it available there. And we're just going to interact with that and allow you to do kind of the enforcement of what's going to be updated. So that's hopefully that answers most of your question there. If not, we can go into a little bit more detail in that as we go through. Mac OS Sonoma support. So any of you who were evaluating what we were doing with Mac OS support, we were in the process of releasing many of these features as Sonoma was releasing. So this came out shortly after. For the most part, we try to stick to day zero support for that. So going forward, when a new version of Windows comes out, we release it pretty much as Microsoft is doing so for patch support. Same thing for Mac OS. We'll be doing that more inline. This time around, it came out a little bit after just because we were still working on getting our Mac support into the Neurons platform at the time. The additional feature that we did add there, though, and I'll show you this when we get into the policy demo here in just a second, is under patch configurations for Mac OS, you now have an ability to do an always reboot. When we launched it, we launched with a reboot only when necessary kind of option. Now we're going with an ability to enforce the reboot no matter what the state is of the machine. You can force that if you want to. So this is what the UI will look like, and I'll show you that that's there. It was turned on in production for all customers already early last week. So if you have not looked at your policy recently, you will see that it's already there, or should be. If it's not, we'll have to take a look at that. But last one here, this is some things around the reboot. We've had some conversations with customers wanting to do some customization around that reboot dialog. So bringing in some text branding and caption kind of capabilities into that. All right. On that note, let's go into, or as Sam would have said, let's bring it to life. So we're going to go into the tenant that I have for, this is one of our CI tenants. It's a development environment. So it has a ton of data, but it's also a very dirty set of data. It's not going to look like your environment normally would. But this gives me an ability to show you a variety of different things here, so I have the right information in there. So first thing, let's jump over to patch intelligence first. I'm going to start here. On that, I've actually already filtered down so you can see that the latest Mac Sonoma update 14.2.1 is available in there, released on December 19th. And you can see here that we do have the vulnerability data tied to it as well. So because of our interactions on the back end with Mike's team and the RBVM platform, we're able to pull in that CVE data and VRR group data. So you'll see that that's all in there as well, and will be for Linux as well. So that is, Sonoma really is kind of a boring demo. Hey, look, there's content there. It's going to work. So on the Linux side, you can see that I've got all of the Linux data that's been assessed on test machines that we were working with there, all the different RPMs that were updated. And there can be a lot of them. I believe some of the test systems they're working with have as many as 400 plus RPMs missing on them. So that's sometimes overwhelming with Linux, but that's all available in there. So if I filter this down to, let's look at just Linux for a second, and we'll look at things with any or also having an exploited CVE. And we can see here again that Linux content filtered down now to specific Linux updates that have a CVE associated with them. And you can see here, this one in particular does have an exploit tied to that, at least one of the CVEs in there as well. So if we drill into that, we can see that same level of risk information that you guys expect on the Windows and Mac side. In this case, CVE 2023-4911 it's a critical VRR group and 9.18 score. The exploit was published on October 3rd, 2023, and it is a remote code execution vulnerability. So you get that same level of visibility. The key there is, once you start scanning, all of this populates on the back end. We pull the results in and we marry that up with the data from the RBVM side to give you that visibility. All right, so we have Linux systems fully working in patch intelligence. Let's go over to the endpoint vulnerability side. Here, you can see I've got a number of different Linux systems and a number of different flavors and versions. Oracle 8 and 9, you see a few of those there. We got RHEL 7, RHEL 9, CentOS 7. We are going through regression testing of those three flavors and multiple versions for Red Hat and Oracle, and Cent 7 for the CentOS side right now. Depending on how they get through all of that, I'll talk about other flavors here in a second. Hold on. Depending on how quickly they get through all of that, we're going to, what versions we don't have fully tested with confidence by the release date later in January, we're going to release incrementally as we get them, checked off and they pass testing. But that is the first family of Linux flavors we were targeting, was the Fedora family. The way that Linux works, we have to, with a family like Fedora, they're all based on that same kind of core kernel. Doing the variations of that for Oracle, for Red Hat, for CentOS is minor efforts once we do the base one. Now, when we get into completely different distros, like Xavier asked about Ubuntu, we have to do a major effort to get the initial agentry and engine set up for that. Once we do that, we can do the variations of that. So the Debian family will get multiple flavors under that at some point. We are going to be coming back. Ubuntu is on our list. If you've got others, let me know. We've got a roadmap defined for the flavor order that we're targeting there. But yes, Ubuntu is in the plan, just not in this first cut. So we'll be coming back around to that. All right. So you can see I've got a number of systems here. Some missing only a few, some missing a whole lot of RPMs. If I click on any of these, just like for Windows or Mac, I can get over to the device patches view and see the deeper view of what's missing or installed for each of these, and if there's any CVEs tied to that. I will say, and those of you who know the Linux space will probably understand this, but for those of you who aren't always as familiar with Linux or haven't spent much time in there, there's a difference in the level of content that each of these flavors really kind of gets to. Oracle tends to do a much better job around the security level details for their streams. When you get into other flavors, there'll be variations to the level of detail we're going to get because those vendors may or may not be as diligent about it. So we do what we can. We try to pull in as much security content as possible, but that's going to be differing based on each of the each of the different Linux flavors and how well their community provides that information. So that being said, we have talked about Linux being in there. Let's go and look at the policy configuration real quick, because there's a couple of things I want to cover real quick before we jump into a couple of the other features. All right, so I've got a Linux patch configuration here. Yeah, you're not going to have as many policies as I've got in this list. These guys are, the whole team each have their different things they're doing. But you can see now that you've got configuration for Windows, for Mac, and for Linux. We had to break these out into separate areas because each of them differ a little bit. For Linux, you've got the ability to turn on Linux patching within the policy. So if I'm going to go into edit mode for this real quick. This is currently turned on. I have opted to do the reboot after, and I can choose to do an always reboot or reboot only when required. If you do the kernel update, you're going to have to reboot. The kernel does require a reboot. If you're interested in having a no reboot kernel update, we have an option for that as well. It's through a partnership we have with a vendor called TuxCare, but that's a very specific approach that they're taking, and I believe Oracle is the only vendor directly who provides a live patching option, but it's only with their specific flavors. TuxCare goes beyond just Oracle with that. But otherwise, if you're patching the kernel, it's going to require a reboot. Most of the other RPMs can be patched without a reboot being needed, so that when required is typically what Linux admins are going to want to go with. But that's kind of the limit to the configuration right now. You don't see things like the patch group and everything in there yet. We're going to be working to bring those in there. So it is kind of a deploy everything model right now. We'll get it to the point where there will be more granularity available. Again, because it's contentless, this is one of those things where you're going to need to do the assessment first. So you could turn on the ability to scan and not do reboot. So if you want to just assess for right now and get a feel for what's going on, I've now configured this policy to scan only, not remediate anything. If I turn on remediation, it'll remediate anything it finds is missing. So just approach with caution there. We will bring patch group capabilities back in. Again, one of the differences is you'd have to scan something first and then add it to a patch group. So the most common way Linux admins are probably going to be administering this is going to be using that inclusive patch group option where you let it scan, decide what things need to be deployed, add those to your patch group, and have that be the way of enforcing. That's on the roadmap. It's going to be coming in a follow-up release. We just didn't have the ability to bring it in this time frame. So touching on Mac OS real quick, as I mentioned, we had that additional reboot feature. So if you scroll down in your Mac configuration, you can see here now I've got that always reboot after an update option available. So that is on in your tenants already. If you've got a Mac configuration, we did not turn it on by default, but the feature is now there and available, so you can turn it on. And the last feature that I wanted to cover was the patch group. Let's see here. This was as far as I got in prepping for the demo. So let's see how well Chris can try or go through this real quick. I'm going to I'm already in edit mode. So deploy patches. That's the deploy and exclude by patch group. This is the, no, maybe I am not seeing it yet, but it might not be turned on in here yet. All right, I'm gonna have to follow up on that one because I don't think it's turned on in this tenant yet. So, but the ability to, oh, maybe it is here, and it's all just under this one area. So I can do a include. So that should make it, yes. So now you can do the include or exclude from there. My apologies, my first time stepping through this myself, huh? So once you do that, this policy is now set up to scan for everything, and deploy only things that are critical and specifically things that are in this patch group. So I can mix and match things a little bit. This gave me the ability to scan for something specifically and exclude or include something additionally to that. I now have the ability as well to say, scan for everything, all security patches, but let's do an exclude of, well, there's no patches in that patch group. That's why that one's not letting me do it. So exclude these 25 patches in this patch group. So even if they're a security patch, we're going to allow you to exclude those. So now you get that ability to do inclusive or exclusive patch groups within your policy. So, all right, that I think wraps up. I'm gonna undo my changes so that Habib doesn't come after me for messing around with this configuration. Excellent. I think on that note then, I'm going to be handing over to Charity. If you do have any other questions, I'm going to check the chat here and make sure I got to everything, but if there's any additional ones, post them over there and I'll be following up. Thanks, everyone.